D&D Beyond now fits in the palm of your hand with the free D&D Beyond app. It's the perfect toolset for beginners, regular players, and seasoned dungeon masters. Play faster with the guided character creator and access your character sheets, spells, and abilities wherever you go. All of your adventures and source books are at your fingertips, even when you're offline. Easily find and access the rules you need when you need them. With more features to come, download the free D&D Beyond app today.
Hello, world. Welcome back to another D&D Beyond Live. I'm Joe. I'm really excited about this one because we're going to talk about how to use terrain, whether it's miniaturized and on your table or if it's imaginary and theater of the mind, and how to take it beyond just like a way to visualize movement when it's time to punch things, and how to use it to like really enhance your storytelling. We're doing this stream because this is something that I'm bad at. I'm really terrible at this, and it's something that I always just I don't know, underserve when I'm DMing. And if you feel like you could use some brush up on it too and some improvement on it too, I have probably the best two people here to talk us through this. We've got Nate from Dwarven Forge, Jason from Realmsmith. Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you guys for being here.
Thank you for having us.
No, absolutely, man. So, okay, you guys have, obviously, you've made terrain like a huge part of your lives. Jason, you're an incredible painter. If you guys aren't following Realmsmith on Instagram, on YouTube, please do so. In addition to being a wonderful DM, just a fantastic painter, a craftsman. And I mean, Nate, you're in your bunker right now. You've literally made terrain a business. So just let's kick off just sort of broadly to you guys, and the floor is yours. Welcome to your TED Talk. Why is terrain so important to storytelling for D&D?
Wow, you're starting with the hardball question.
You know, just
like, hey, how's the weather up in Toronto or anything?
I don't, when
it's
I work out,
it's not good. Trust me.
When I work out, I never stretch, and it always seems it's always fine. So is
that why you're limping?
Yeah, that's why I'm just bruised.
Yeah.
Well, I think for me, we're generally everybody is playing D&D or any other TTRPG or whatever you're playing to tell a story together, right? And a huge part of a story, be it a movie or a role-playing game or whatever, is where's the thing set? Like where is this happening, and what does that do in terms of what does that make you feel like? What are the dangers that are there? What is the, how does that affect your story, and how does it make it more impactful or more interesting, right? Setting a boring dialogue scene suddenly on the edge of a cliff by some boiling lava. Can lava boil? I don't know, what, molten magma or whatever, like suddenly it's like, well, maybe someone's going to get shoved in this lava. Like, what is this? You're suddenly listening a little more intently because maybe this is going to take a twist and do whatever. So I don't know, I guess for me, it's another element of the storytelling. You've got the characters and you've got your location. And then you've got some drama and emotions and stuff. I don't know. What about you, Jason? Why?
Yeah. And I think off the top, you said spatial awareness, right? So that for me is kind of what brought me to using terrain. So the ability for my players to know exactly where they are in that moment. But, historically, I think that, people have always said, and especially old schoolers or purists and theater of the mind, they talk about the fact that it takes you out of the element. From my experience, especially because a lot of the players that have played at my table are new players, to D&D. I think it helps. Like I've had people come up with ideas because of the terrain that I'm presenting around their characters that they wouldn't have come up with in theater of the mind. So for people who even have a hard time with theater of the mind or have a hard time imagining, terrain has really helped to actually boost that experience for them. And see things in the environment that they otherwise would never have interacted with. So I think it's an enhancement. Yeah.
For new players and for kids, right? Like nothing better than you throw a build on the table and suddenly they're like, oh, I have a thing to focus on. Maybe, there's this huge rule book that I may or may not have read, and there's all this whatever, but it's like, okay, I can see like, those are some bad guys. These are us. There's a pit of acid between us and them. Like you suddenly they see the scene and they know what's going on and they get excited. It's like, it definitely galvanizes certain people.
Well, when we, Oh, go ahead.
So and no description can kind of trump putting an ancient red dragon on the table in front of your party and just seeing the size difference and the kind of the excitement that comes with that. That's my opinion.
The analogy I like to make is it's sort of like making a comic book. So theater of the mind is amazing, right? And I use it for a bunch of things and a bunch of situations, and you can paint these marvelous pictures and whatever, but ultimately you can't fill in every single little detail, right? You'd be at the table for 10 hours, people would get bored. It's like listening to George R.R. Martin to spend 4 pages describing a piece of pudding or whatever. Like, it just goes on, like stuff will go on and on and on, or it's just, or people have a different picture or whatever. As soon as you throw physical terrain down, that's filling in a lot of the details. So like there's, you describe the cave and how it feels and it's wet and it's whatever, but you're not describing where every single stalagmite is. You're not describing where every divot in the floor is. You can't, you don't have to, and even if you did, and it's in mind, people don't exactly know where that is. Anyway, you maybe describe the one big column wherever, but you put it on the table, it's like that. So for comic books, like the theater of the mind is the person who does the initial sketch, right? You have this beautiful drawing, it's awesome. But then terrain is the inker and the colorist that come in and add those little details and that definition and that extra thing that's then bringing your theater of the mind alive. And what I like to do is I like to introduce my scenes with theater of the mind, and then you drop the reveal out there, and then they fill in the rest of the details by seeing what the stuff is.
I love that. I love that combination of the two things working together. So let's say, and I feel like this is for anyone, right? Whether you're purely theater of the mind, whether you're rolling on a budget a little bit and you've done your Joe Starr best to draw something on a piece of paper.
Let's see an example. Let's see. Come on.
Oh God, no. Yeah. or you've pulled the dude and you're just like, this is a behemoth. This is a snake. Or you're all out. You're using Dwarven Forge. You're using your minis after you've watched a painting tutorial by Jason. But all of those things sort of still need, sort of like you said, that initial sketch. So especially with what you just said, Nate, with like you love to do that setup for theater of the mind and then do that reveal. What are some things for someone who's just like, man, I don't even know where to start? Like, what are some key elements you guys as storytellers really like to hit with that theater of the mind aspect of terrain? Whether it's in service of that reveal or whether it's just in service of, this is what we got, man.
Oh. You want to go first?
Go, you take it, Nate.
All right. Well,
Nate, go.
I love Sly Flourish, right? Who's written a bunch of really awesome, his Fantastic Locations book and his the Lazy Dungeon Master book, some really great prep tools, whatever. In his Fantastic Locations book, he sort of kicks it off with saying like, hey, if you're going to take the time to like craft a scene, do a thing, like set it somewhere fantastic, right? Don't put it on like a dirt road, put it on, make it exciting, make it big, make it memorable, make it fantastic. And he has a whole book of like that it gives you ideas for locations, how to this, whatever, and like spends a lot of time thinking about the scene, whatever. So that's how I kind of think of like, well, how can I kind of push this thing, right? Particularly if my home game, I play with my 8-year-old son, my 9-year-old nephew, my 11-year-old niece, and my brother who I've been playing D&D with since 1983. But like, you don't want to lose their attention. Like you want to, you don't want to just put out like a thing. I'm like, I got to keep these kids away from video games or whatever. Like you want to drop out something that just makes them a scene that just feels epic and they can't turn away. Right. It's just like writing a movie or a TV show or something. You want to, like, when you got you come back from the commercial break, you want people to be like not leaving because they're like, man, I can't wait to see what's there. Like this is, you're blowing their mind with something that's really exciting and engaging. So I guess I go for what's going to be real, what's just going to hook them and be like, oh man, I want to explore that, or there's danger there, or there's mystery there, or there's something, it sparks some emotion for them.
Yeah, to sort of stick with that dirt road. It's like, okay, I've got my dirt road, and then always ask yourself like, but what else? Like, what is it about this dirt road?
Well, Jason would put like a creepy hag's hut right next to it or whatever. Suddenly the others are like, oh, wait, what, I might die if I go in there. Like,
and I think that terrain allows you to take away the mechanical guesswork that often happens too. So it actually makes room for theater of the mind. In my scenario, everyone's been at a table where somebody's like, oh, I cast a lightning bolt. Oh, I wasn't there. I was actually over here. And terrain takes that guesswork out, right? Terrain's like, no, you were there. You agreed that you were there. You moved your mini there. Now we can just move on. And we can focus on the storytelling rather than focusing on the mechanics or the math of where everybody was and how far they moved and where they were now. And if they're in the spell radius and all that kind of stuff. So I think it actually enhances theater of the mind in a lot of ways. You're also limited by the terrain you have sometimes. So that's the other situation too. And I mean, in our stream, we use theater of the mind a lot of times. I mean, I have the benefit of having a lot of terrain because we have a lot of great friends who give us terrain, but or craft it or whatever the case may be. But you are limited in your home with what you have, and so sometimes theater of the mind is the best way to convey something that you can't necessarily represent with something that you have at home.
Well, you can't build an 800-foot high waterfall probably in your basement. I mean, maybe you could.
You could.
I'd like to see it.
Yeah.
But then
it's like, in fact, if I pan to the right.
Yeah. I prepared a little something. Yeah.
No, that one scene's over. You just spent 3 months building this waterfall, and now what?
Yeah.
This whole campaign is waterfall based.
You're just traveling down this 800-foot waterfall for like 3 months.
Yeah. I paid for this. You guys live in this waterfall. My house, my rules.
Back to your original question, I think it would, location just gives you so much where you're setting a scene in terms of what's your emotional base that you're building on. What are some stakes you can immediately, change the stakes of the scene by if it's not on a dirt road or, they're outside the guards' chambers. So they have to be really quiet because they'll get discovered, or they're, where it's set makes such a difference. And also just or an unexpected, you can have a fun unexpected twist because you're doing you're matching a thing.
Yeah, well, I love that addition because it's like something I don't think about often is, I always think of stakes a lot of the times as like personal stakes and, plot consequences and stuff like that. But I love what you're saying about like there are additional stakes just like literally all around you. Our lava, whether it's boiling or molten, we haven't decided yet. That's right. Those concerns just add so many more levels to your game. If your party's on a fetch quest and they have fetched the quest and they are fetching it back, you don't want to drop that thing in lava. If a fight's going to become more complex, I think that's a really interesting way to add additional stakes and drama.
Or where you make them have, if there's an inter-party argument, but it happens in the queen's like audience chamber. Suddenly it's like, well, we can't, we have this really tense debate, but we can't because we're in the audience chamber surrounded by these like lords and ladies, and they're like you can change the stake, make it a whole much more tense by putting it in an interesting location that makes it even more of a challenge.
Yeah. Well. Another question for you guys, and then I've actually got some questions from chat for you guys if you're ready. So roll up your sleeves, get prepared, and also, hey, chat, you got questions? Drop them in, and and I'll ask these fine gentlemen. But something we were talking about when we were first chatting about you guys coming on was sort of the idea of terrain being so much more than just like, the hexagonal map, or, okay, I have to move 5 more before I can punch something. How do you, okay, you've done your reveal, you've put it down. What are the ways that you sort of direct your players now on that piece of terrain? Like, what are the things you call attention to? How are the ways you use that so that they're looking at it as more than just, okay, this is the combat field?
Yeah, it's a great idea. Great question. So the flip of that, and I'll qualify what I'm about to say with I have gotten stuck because I love terrain and I love to build terrain. I have gotten stuck building a crazy dungeon, and because we're streaming, oftentimes if you're at a home game, it's a bit different. But getting stuck in the slog and it drawing things out because now you have a dungeon that's huge and it's going to take 4 episodes to get through something that should have taken an episode or something like that. And then that's the same for a home game, where you get you create this elaborate. Yeah, it happens with everything, right?
Always takes long.
Right. And so a specific situation for me would be to keep it interesting. What I've done actually is I'll take, like, we're running Curse of Strahd in our stream right now. What I'll do is I'll take the map of whatever building. They were just in Argynvost Holt. And so I will take it and I will eliminate rooms that aren't necessarily interesting from the source material to get people to where I want to get to sooner, or close up some passages, or add interesting things to something that makes sense from a narrative perspective. I mean, that's something I think is incredibly important when using terrain, because you can get bogged down by terrain, just like you can get bogged down by storytelling, or narrative, or shopping, or whatever else, you know, tends to occur.
So because you have to build it, you're trimming the fat before you go in. You're like, well, there's 19 rooms in this house, and there's only really 7 of them are actually really interesting. So I'm only going to build 7 of them.
Yeah,
I love that from a sort of terrain building perspective. I always feel in the writing business, I'm a hack that writes YouTube videos. I'm not really in the writing business, but you know, for comedy and stuff like that, you call it killing your darlings. Yep. You know, I got all these jokes that I absolutely love, but I got to get this thing under 2 minutes. I got to start hacking off these extra rooms that like I thought were really cool, but maybe they don't actually like serve that direct purpose in the story, and maybe they can show up later on.
Yeah. Enter the scene late and leave early. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Enter the dungeon late and leave early. Like cut out half those rooms or consolidate. Well,
and if it was up to me, I would fill my entire house with a life-size version of Barovia, not life-size, but a miniature version of Barovia if I could, right? Like I would do everything in miniatures. And sometimes I find myself like, it's just literally a time where they're supposed to talk to somebody, but I will create this elaborate set that either never gets used, or a scene for 2 seconds, or they get caught thinking there's something important there because I've created terrain for it, but there really isn't. It's really just a plot point to get them from A to B. And so you get caught kind of in that sort of hook as well, where, Yeah.
So, this question from chat goes, go ahead. Go ahead.
So before they even get to the build, the Genesis, so it's a 2-part answer to your question. So I use terrain to help me write the scenes too, right? Like I have an idea and I'm like, you know, I want to kind of tackle this thing or whatever. And then so I get kind of this half-baked idea of like, you know, what it's going to be. And then I start building, right? I'm like, well, what is it? And then through building and I'm forced to quantify it, right? It's like you have this rough outline and then you actually write out the paragraphs. So I'm like quantifying, I'm like, I get a bunch of ideas of like, oh, this is where, you know, now this can be an area for this, and then, oh, we need to do a thing or whatever. So it's for before we even get the players there, it just helps with my writing process of like figuring out what it looks like. And then I get a bunch of ideas. So I write, and then I go back and I kind of finish the scene, whatever. And similarly, I can open up a drawer of terrain, or you can have a bucket of stuff or whatever you're looking at. And it's kind of like having a random generator table, right? Where I'm like, well, what am I going to put in this room that's interesting, whatever. And you look at your stuff and there's a whole bunch of things that you're like, oh, wait, I didn't think a 2-headed crocodile. That's exactly what I needed. Or, you know, whatever, like a weird bubbling cauldron. Maybe they're dabbling with, you know, some weird caustic acid that they got from this, or, you know, whatever the heck it is. So it can spark a bunch of story ideas for me. Beginning. So then your other part, how do you kind of direct people once they're in the thing? I always like to, if I can, bake in a reveal. Your co-host,
sorry.
Dynamite.
It's so cute. Adorable.
I like to bake in.
Don't encourage her.
Reveals or discoveries. Ideally some, you know, you want some narrative beats in your scenes, particularly your combat scenes, or whatever, where there's some revelation or some discovery or something. And a lot of times I can use terrain for that, be it a special effect. You turn on a fogger or a light, you know, there's a lighted piece and you can click that remote and suddenly this glow comes out and they're like, wait a second, we're like, what's on the ground? Where are we, you know, or thing, or you can, there's something like you can reveal a trap or a thing, or put down that thing they didn't see. And then that's like just the most fun. So everybody's like focused in, and now they're looking all around for like, well, what else is out here that we're going to discover that we didn't know.
I love that. And
terrain is awesome for that.
It's cool for me to hear too, because I'm from a sort of like creation and like writing perspective. I'm more of like a what's happening, and then where and on what is like further down the list, just like the way my brain works. So I love the idea of maybe sometime I do need to like shake it up and just be like, okay, where, and then kind of work from there. I love that approach. That's really cool.
Well, sometimes I'll trigger my beats. I'll have zones. I'll be like, if they get to this zone, which often you do in writing too, right? If you get to this zone, it triggers this reveal or this thing or this event happens or they see this whatever or whatever. So I kind of have I have my little areas sort of zoned out, like imaginary lines of like, okay, if they get over here or close enough that I can then do a thing. So it's like it becomes a visual for me. It becomes like a sort of a physical and visual cue to remember those story beats or whatnot.
Oh, that's awesome. One more question for you guys. I dig this one. This is from Simonson. How do you know how much to add to a room? So I guess it's kind of a question about balance, so that your players know what they can do without adding so much that maybe it kind of limits their imaginations, their own choices. Something we talk a lot sometimes here about is sort of the option of, a player being like, well, what's in here? And you kind of being like, well, what do you see? Or so how do you sort of find that balance of terrain without, taking away those options?
Yeah. Nate?
I mean, I just build until I run out of time. I think, it also depends on how you're playing, right? If you're playing in person, you can put a little more clutter in a room. If you're playing remotely, I use Vorpal Board, which is unbelievable remote play platform that it basically uses your camera, your phone as a camera for terrain. So it has a terrain cam, and then is, video platform there. So but I tend to have a little less when you're playing with the remote players, have a little less there because it's, they're already looking through a lens or whatever. So you want it to be pretty clear what's what. And I don't know, you want to avoid analysis paralysis of just, there's 47 different objects in this room that you can all interact with and whatnot. But yeah. I think it just depends on your players and your platform and your style. And you can also just make it very clear or what, like, maybe there's a whole bunch of clutter in the room, but it's like you can call out these three things in your description and your whatever. They're glowing. Maybe you start there.
Yeah. Or even clutter suggesting, yeah, you can dig through this, man. Just this several candlesticks represents clutter. Yeah. I dig that.
And it tends to be easier when you're doing homebrew, but if you're doing something like we are with Curse of Strahd, where there are specific areas and items in a room that you have to represent, I could spend all of my time creating physical representations of what need to be in there. So it just kind of goes without saying that I will say there are pedestals with, for example, a recent session, I was like, there are pedestals with busts. I didn't have those in the room because, again, I didn't have those available to me. Yep. But there's kind of just an understanding that, what I describe kind of supersedes what is actually in the terrain. So, yeah.
And you can always do you get the feeling that these busts are connected to the door somehow, or,
Yeah. I dig that. Yeah.
D&D Beyond now fits in the palm of your hand with the free D&D Beyond app. It's the perfect tool set for beginners, regular players, and seasoned dungeon masters. Play faster with the guided character creator and access your character sheets, spells, and abilities wherever you go. All of your adventures and source books are at your fingertips, even when you're offline. Easily find and access the rules you need when you need them. With more features to come, download the free D&D Beyond app today.